In the early 1920s, Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle wasn't a punchline. He was a phenomenon. In the Silmy, a global language, Arbuckles was everywhere. Posters, marquees, fan magazines, and the kind of box office certainty studios dreamed of. He was one of the biggest stars of his day, the sort of performer audiences trusted to turn a bad week into a good night. And that's the first reason this scandal still stings. It didn't destroy a struggling performer. It took down someone who, in that moment, felt immune. When a culture watches the most loved fall, it learns a cruel lesson. Fame isn't armor. Sometimes fame is gasoline. Over one Labor Day weekend in San Francisco, that certainty shattered. Virgil actress attended a party at the St. Francis Hotel and later became seriously ill. She died days later. Arbuckle was arrested on September 10, 1921, and sensational accusations spread quickly, helped by an era of newspapers competing to shock, not to soothe. Here's the part most modern viewers don't realize until you show them the headlines. This case didn't just become news. It became entertainment. Early Hollywood had already learned to sell celebrity. Now the press learned it could sell celebrity collapse even faster. A century later, historians still point to this case as a tomb's famous people, not just as entertainers, but as moral symbols. The scandal created a template, a shocking allegation, a wall of headlines, public certainty before a verdict, and an industry scrambling to prove it can clean itself up. History. Com notes that Arbuckle was later acquitted, yet the scandal essentially ended his career. A reminder that cultural punishment can outlive court outcomes. This episode is a case file, not a rumor reel. We track what is documented, the arrest and charges, the legal saga that dragged through 1921 and 1922, 3 trials that turned a human death into a national spectacle, and an acquittal that came with a rare jury apology, followed by a moral crackdown that shaped how Hollywood policed itself for decades. Because Arbuckle's story isn't only about one man. It's about the birth of the celebrity scandal machine, the moment the public discovered it could consume a person's life the same way it consumed a movie. And once the public tastes that power, it never fully gives it back. Arbuckle's rise is important because it explains why the backlash turned so violent. In the silent era, comedy stars weren't just actors, they were engines. Studios depended on them to fill seats, and audiences depended on them for comfort. Arbuckle's persona wasn't mysterious. It was approachable. Physical comedy, warmth, the kind of performer who looked like he belonged to the public. He wasn't just popular, he was commercially foundational. In a silent film economy, a superstar could be the difference between a studio's profits and its collapse. That's why Scandal hit how many viewers assume today. There were fewer media channels, fewer stars, and a single name could dominate the market. When that single name became toxic, everyone who depended on it, studios, exhibitors, distributors, had to protect themselves fast. And this was an era when Hollywood was already under moral surveillance. Religious groups, local censor boards, and political reformers were pressuring the film industry to prove it could regulate itself. Executives feared not just bad publicity, but real business consequences, bans, censorship cuts, and the kind of public backlash that could damage every movie, not just one actor. Britannica notes that Hollywood executives later pushed Will H. Hayes to ban Arbuckle in part to deflect attention from other scandals and protect the industry's image. Then there's the timing. By 1921, America was already primed for morality panic. Prohibition had turned parties into symbols, not just events. So when newspapers described a boozy weekend in a luxury hotel, the story arrived preloaded with judgment. It didn't matter what a jury would later decide. The culture had already decided what it wanted the story to mean. The press environment amplified that judgment. Tabloids and mainstream papers alike competed on speed and shock, and the Arbuckle story offered both: a famous comedian, a young woman's death, and a hotel setting that made readers feel like they were peeking into a forbidden world. Once the tone was set, every later detail, medical testimony, witness contradictions, legal nuance, had to fight against the first impression. And in scandal culture, the first impression isn't a draft. It becomes the final cut. That's why, when viewers ask, how could a career end without a conviction? The answer is, because celebrity isn't a legal contract. It's a social contract. And social contracts can be broken by suspicion alone. Arbuckle's star power also put him inside Hollywood's early power networks. Agents, producers, studios, publicists, people who knew how to manufacture a public image. But those same systems weren't built to protect someone from moral outrage. They were built to sell. When the story flipped, the machine didn't defend him. It defended itself. Part 2 sets the stakes. Hollywood was watching its own reflection, and it was terrified the public would decide the movies were corrupting America. That fear is the seed of what comes next. A scandal that a person but changes an industry's rules. Now we enter the core event, carefully, without turning tragedy into spectacle. Virginia Rapp attended a party at the St. Francis Hotel during Labor Day weekend 1921. She became ill and later died on September 9, 1921. Within days, the story became a national obsession. Arbuckle was arrested on September 10, 1921, and the accusations were framed in the most sensational terms possible. The press coverage didn't simply report facts. It created a narrative, one that made the public feel like it was watching a morality play in real time. This is where a modern timeline helps the audience understand the damage. Because even if you know the ending, you can feel how quickly the middle becomes irreversible. The arrest creates a headline. The headline creates a public truth. And public truth spreads faster than court truth. Contemporary coverage often framed the case in extremes, either a monster story or a witch hunt, because extremes sell. But courtrooms don't run on extreme feelings. They run on burdens of proof. That mismatch is where reputations die. The public wants certainty, while the law demands precision. The charges and theories of the case shifted as it moved through the system, with prosecutors pushing severe interpretations and defense attorneys attacking credibility, motive, and medical uncertainty. That's why the case became a marathon instead of a single dramatic verdict. When evidence is contested and witnesses disagree, the jury room becomes the true arena, and the public, watching from outside, grows angrier with every delay. Behind the scenes, the legal system began its slow work. Statements, medical testimony, witnesses with conflicting accounts, arguments about what happened in that room and what could be proven versus what could only be insinuated. The case didn't become famous because it was clear. It became famous because it was unclear, and newspapers filled the uncertainty with certainty. And that uncertainty is key to the case file, because it explains the next phase. 3 trials. If the evidence had produced a clean resolution, there wouldn't have been 3. The jury rooms would have given one answer, and the country would have moved on. Instead, the story dragged, and dragging gives scandal time to harden into identity. Part 3 ends on the cliffhanger, that a beloved star might be convicted, and the simultaneous possibility that the case might never produce the tidy ending the crowd demanded. In scandal culture, untidy doesn't reduce rage, it multiplies it. This is the part that turns the Arbuckle scandal into a historic case file. There wasn't one trial, there were 3. 2 ended with juries unable to agree, and in the third, April 1922, Arbuckle was acquitted. The third jury didn't just deliver not guilty. In what multiple historical accounts describe as an unusual move, jurors issued a written statement apologizing to Arbuckle. That detail matters BK and culture. The courtroom reached closure, but the public story was already locked into shame. Think about what 3 trials do to a person in the public eye. Even if you win, you lose time. You lose allies who don't want the risk. You lose the ability to be an imagination. A second trial tells the world, We still don't know. A third trial tells the world, we refused to stop looking. That pressure is a punishment by process. And in the middle of it, Hollywood panicked. The industry didn't want another scandal to stick to the whole business, so it pushed toward self-policing. After the acquittal, Will H. Hayes, head of the newly formed motion picture self-regulation effort, announced a ban on Arbuckle working in films in April 1922, later lifting it in December 1922. The symbolism was brutal. The industry created a moral referee, and his first headline move was to ban the most infamous name in town. ThoughtCo describes the ban and notes it was later lifted, but emphasizes that the damage was already done. Arbuckle's public value had collapsed. That sequence is the heart of the tragedy. Acquitted in court, punished in culture. The legal system said, not guilty. The industry said, we can't afford you. And the public, trained by headlines, often never updated its internal verdict. So Part 4 isn't only trial drama, it's the moment you nix of cancellation before the word existed. Newspapers create a monster, juries struggle, the court finally clears the person, the industry still rejects him to protect itself. After the verdict, Arbuckle tried to rebuild, but the ban and the stigma did what convictions often do. They rewrote his identity in the marketplace. Hollywood's top executives and censorship pressures made him toxic, and even when the formal ban was lifted, the damage stayed. Exhibitors didn't want protests outside theaters. Studios didn't want moral crusaders targeting their next release. Newspapers didn't want to lose the outrage machine they'd built. So Arbuckle became a kind of sacrifice, an early example of the industry offering a single name to the public as proof that Hollywood could police itself. That's the paradox of self-regulation. It can protect audiences from harm, but it can also protect institutions from scrutiny by shifting blame onto one person and moving on. In Arbuckle's CN, after a jury cleared him, because the industry's priority wasn't justice, it was survival. So Arbuckle adapted. He worked behind the camera under the pseudonym William Goodrich, directing comedy shorts and trying to survive in an industry to his face. It's one of the saddest ironies in early Hollywood. A man once paid to be seen had to become invisible to keep working. And even that workaround carried a whisper. Anyone inside the business knew who Goodrich really was. The pseudonym didn't erase the scandal. It simply allowed the industry to benefit from his skill without confronting the public backlash that came with his name. Britannica and Wikipedia both note this period of directing under the alias, a quiet career hidden inside credits most audiences never read. When he later returned to acting in the early 1930s, it wasn't the triumphant comeback the public myth loves. It was modest, fragile, and late. He died in 1933 at 46, in a life that ended far from the promise his early fame once carried. So why does this scandal matter now, more than a century later? Because it teaches the first rule of modern fame. The public doesn't only watch your art, it watches your life. And comes content. Your legal outcome can become irrelevant to your cultural outcome. Arbuckle's case helped accelerate Hollywood's image management era because studios learned that one scandal could threaten the entire industry's legitimacy. It also showed newspapers how profitable moral outrage could be. In a way, this was one of the first times celebrity scandal became a business model. And you can still see the blueprint today. Modern scandals move faster because social media replaced the morning paper, but the mechanics are the same. A narrative forms, it hardens, and by the time the legal system speaks, the public has already moved on. Arbuckle's file is the early warning that due process and public opinion are two different courts, and they rarely deliver the same sentence. Here's the loop ending for your audience. Arbuckle was acquitted, but the scandal never fully ended. It kept being retold as a warning about parties, about fame, about Hollywood decay, about the power of headlines to become permanent truth. So the final question isn't, was he cleared? We know he was. The final question is darker. If a jury can apologize and the culture can still punish, who is the trial really for, the court or the crowd?